That through the fire of Molech shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone them. Leviticus 20. What would you sacrifice to reclaim what you cherish most? What price would be too steep? Would you offer your own life? In ancient times, different people settled in the lands of the Levant. At the heart of the known world, beneath the ever-changing empires of Mesopotamia, you could find these forgotten nations. Through the worship of their gods, they would draw strength to conquer and devastate their enemies, and enemies lurked everywhere. A pantheon of gods ruled the land in those times, each of them a lord, all of them monsters. Uttering their names alone would invoke their wrath. Among them were Baal, lord of storms, Mot, master of death, Resheth, bringer of plague, Dagon, fiend of the deep, and Molech, the insatiable beast. To survive, one had to appease the gods and obey their cruel will. The land of the Levant was ever thirsty for the blood of man. The earth itself would whisper an irresistible compulsion to those on the battlefield. More, feed me more. In times of peace, the gods' hunger would not wane and would drive man mad. There was only one cure for that madness: a blood sacrifice. One of their own would be cast into the flames. Thus, madness and grief would be exchanged for a peace of silence. Though their reign of terror ended 4 millennia ago, they never truly vanished. Time had diminished their dominion, but they remained hidden in the earth. No more gods, now malevolent demons. They still sustain themselves on the blood of the land, and blood still flows in the Levant. In the ancient city of Jerusalem, where enough blood had been spilled to fill rivers, lies the most infamous valley in the world, Gehenna, the valley of hell. There those gods had feasted in ancient times, and it is there they linger still, entombed beneath layers of concrete and asphalt, patiently waiting for the mad and the desperate to descend. Perhaps it was that same madness that drove Michael Katz to that place. It was on a rainy Tuesday night that Michael decided to take the winding road by the valley. He drove there to put an end to his nightmares. He'd wanted to drive it for a long time, but during the day, it would be jammed with traffic. He often imagined himself driving along the curves of that road and letting go of the wheel. In his mind, the road disappears, and so does his grief and everything else. No more shame, no more guilt, no more tender memories. It all tumbles down the valley into the dark nothing below. As the rain thickened into a downpour, Michael pressed harder on the gas. The faster he went, the stronger the fear spread throughout his body. He could barely see the way ahead of him. The windshield wipers swung uselessly back and forth against the storm. When the seed of regret finally sprouted within him, it was all too late. The last thing he saw before the car veered off the edge of the hill was the image of his daughter, Gabriella. He could have sworn she was sitting beside him in the car, her small hands cradling a lifeless bird, tears streaking down her cheeks. He remembered that day. She had been only 6. He had wanted to tell her it would be okay, but she had been inconsolable. He reached for her visage, desperate to hold her one last time, just as the car shattered through the guardrail and he smacked his head. The car rolled 7 times before crashing to a halt at the bottom of the valley. Each violent spin flung Michael around the driver's seat like a rag doll, battering him until all went black. In the depths of that void, evil stared down at him, as he did every night since she was gone. That wicked gaze tore at him until he jolted awake, gasping and drenched in cold sweat. When he came to, he could not believe he was still alive, alone in his destroyed car. His body ached with every breath. He was horribly sore with a few shallow cuts and an awful headache, but nothing physically broken. Blood trickled into his eyes, sharp and hot. It appeared to him God had deprived him of the sweet release yet again. He slowly unbuckled himself and crawled out of the wreckage. His treacherous mind kept conjuring visions of Gabriella. The road lights high above seemed impossibly far, like cold, distant stars. Overcome, he collapsed to his knees and let out a raw, animalistic cry that echoed helplessly off the valley's walls. When his voice died out into a whimper, he noticed another sound passing through the darkness. The faint beating of drums reached his ears now. It came from a crack in the wall, a cave carved into the side of the valley. Had it been there a moment before? Wiping his face, he staggered toward the source of the sound. The cave's mouth was narrow, forcing Michael to squeeze through it as he entered, the cold stones scraping his bruised skin. Inside, the air turned heavy and damp, laced with a metallic aroma that clung to his throat. The drumming still felt distant, but filled the echoes, the hollow chambers of the cave. Torches lit an elaborate tunnel system, man-made but millennia old. As he ventured deeper, he studied the many paintings covering the walls. Most were eroded and unintelligible smears, but some remained disturbingly clear, depicting humans and animals. One of them showed a human slaughtering a goat or a calf, crimson paint slashed across the animal's throat. Another showed two birds in a pool of blood, one beheaded. But one painting stood apart from the rest. Here the roles were reversed. Animal reigned over man. A large cow-like creature loomed menacingly over a small broken human figure. The person's form snapped in two. Red pigment spilled out from its center mass while flames danced around it. Michael touched the red paint out of curiosity. It was thick, wet. He recoiled with disgust. Then the steady pulse of the distant drum suddenly erupted into a wild thunderstorms. The noise drew Michael's attention towards one of the branching tunnels. The path ran straight ahead of him and carved away to the right. And there, at the farthest edge of sight, stood a young girl facing away from him. Wavy black hair ran down the length of her small frame. He knew it couldn't be her, but his heart tore apart at the sight of her likeness. He called out to her, but before she could turn around, a tall, masked figure appeared, seized her hand, and pulled her deeper into the tunnel. Michael raced after them, panic clawing at his chest. The path of the tunnel twisted violently left and right, splitting without pattern, then converging again without sense. Every time he would follow her disappearing behind a corner, he would find her at the next corner, still out of reach. His breathing turned erratic, his heart matching the drums. Once more she was taken away from him. He was powerless now as he had been back then. Finally reaching the end of the tunnel, Michael emerged into the heart of hell. The chamber before him was vast and ancient, its ceiling lost in shadow. All around him were enormous monoliths towering over the man. On them were podiums and altars, dried and fresh blood painting their sides. Most disturbing to him were the countless tunnels littering the walls of the chamber like a giant hive of wasps. At the far end of the chamber, stairs climbed to a broad platform. There, a tall figure draped in a dark robe stood perfectly still. The figure's face was obscured by a hood, and only his pale, bony hands were visible, stretching out over the main altar. Behind him, cloaked in deep shadow, loomed the colossal statue. Despite the darkness, Michael could see its form with terrifying clarity. A hulking, human-like creature with the head of an ox, forged entirely of copper. It was several times the size of the robed figure. The jagged horns of the beast were long and sharp at the edges, as were its gnashing teeth. It was seated with its legs crossed and arms reaching out to receive something not yet there. You stand before Molech, the insatiable god, echoed the robed man's deep voice. What have you to offer? Michael trembled at the mention of the demon's name. He lifted his gaze to the face of the ox. There was something eerie about that statue. It hadn't moved, yet its carved eyes remained fixed on Michael. There was deep-seated hatred within those lifeless eyes, a loathing for humanity. Where is my girl? Michael's voice cracked as he pleaded. Give me back my Gabriella. He was answered by a painful silence. It was his fault, he knew it. He had been away from home. He thought to bring her a birthday gift on his return. A pet bird, same as the one she'd lost. A living bird to make up for the dead one. What a fool he thought himself when he'd arrived home to find only ruin. He stood now alone and pitiful in front of the oxen god. All around him bloodied altars and endless tunnels. From those tunnels the sound of drums swelled again, closer this time. Then dozens of figures began emerging from the darkness. These masked men marched in from all sides. Some were carrying drums strapped to their waists, while their accomplices followed behind, dragging terrified animals to each of the altars of the chamber. The beating of the drums was now accompanied by the frightened cacophony of goats, sheep, and birds. It was maddening to hear. One by one, the cries of the animals were cut short, replaced by the rush of blood spilling down, coating the walls of the altars and pulling at his feet. "You are all insane!" Michael roared at the faceless man. "Monsters!" "Monsters?" the priest asked, dumbfounded as if he was unfamiliar with the word. "You took my girl. You've taken everything away from me." The priest stood there in silence. The slaughtering stopped. The drum stopped. It was quiet enough Michael could hear blood dripping. "We do not take anything from you. It is you who must give." "What?" "All who enter the Tophet of Molech come with a sacrifice willingly. What do you wish to gain, and what have you come here to offer in return?" Michael was about to object to this ridiculous claim when the words died in his mouth. The priest was right. He had come here for a reason. Silence. Michael craved only for true silence. That's all he longed for anymore. A silence to eradicate everything, to make him forget how his world had been ripped away, how his heart had been torn open. "I see her everywhere," Michael whimpered as the dam broke inside of him. "I cannot get these images out of my mind, these sounds, her scent." A long pause drew until he could spell out the words. "I want it all gone." "He knows your torments. He grants you peace. Bring her forth and offer her to him." Suddenly, Michael felt a tiny hand slip into his own. Warm, familiar, ethereal. It was like the holy's heart tore open again. He dared not look down, terrified of committing this fiction to the void of reality. Or worse, discovering that it was no fiction at all. The warmth of this soft touch rattled him and sent tremors coursing throughout his body. Giving her to Molech was all he had to do. What a blessing it would be. After all, gods, like humans, have their purpose. Perhaps the oxen god's purpose was to release the suffering of those already damned. It wouldn't be too difficult to get it over with. All Michael had to do was to guide her up the stairs, place her into the arms of Molech, and let him take away the anguish. A sacrifice of madness and grief for a piece of silence. But just as he reached the altar, the face of malice caught his eye once more. Up close, it was impossible to consider that wicked stare of the statue as anything but vile. This was no god. This was the wrath of man. Fire ignited within the belly of Molech, glowing through the seams and cracks in the copper, spreading to its outstretched arms. The priest beckoned Michael closer. "No, I can't do this," Michael whispered as he retreated away from the statue. The priest seized Michael by his arm with a force that threatened to crush it. He tried to wrestle himself free, but the priest's iron grip only dragged him closer to Molech's open chest. He let go of the tiny hand that held him, and she was there no more. "Damn you all to hell, you and your rotten god!" As the fire reached the eyes of the statue, the ire of the beast was all clear for everyone to see. Unable to break free, Michael pushed the priest onto the statue. He held him against the hot metal and didn't let go even as the robed man released his arm. He detested the priest. He wanted him to purge him. Something shameful and hideous inside of Michael erupted into a blind rage. The robe disintegrated, skin boiled, but the priest remained silent. Only Michael's primal scream echoed throughout the chamber. The fire quickly spread from the statue to the other altars. In the form of an unholy miracle, the blood that covered the stone became fuel for the flames. The blaze swept through the chamber, climbing walls and licking every corner. The priest of Molech remained motionless between the wrath of Molech on one side and Michael's on the other. As his robes caught on fire, he showed no panic. The priest simply stood there until he was engulfed. By the time Michael let go of the immolated man, his own hands had been horribly burned. The masked figures scrambled away from the altar in fear, stumbling over one another. Some caught on fire while the rest fled back into the tunnels. A few surviving animals pulled free of their bondage and spread throughout the chamber in pandemonium. One dove, still covered in another's blood, took flight and disappeared into the darkness above. The room was eventually left empty.